Hello and welcome to this edition of Sapita's Show. This edition is actually the part two of the last show we had on mental health literacy in Africa, its necessity and benefit. The concept of mental health, despite its many misunderstandings, is actually a beautiful and meaningful concept. When it is rightly understood, it can be leveraged for emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. In the first part of this particular topic, mental health literacy in Africa is necessity and benefit. Our guest speaker, Dr. Von Shurro, debunked many negative conceptions of mental health amid other related life improving concepts he shared. The remarkable reviews and comments we got were so overwhelming that there was a huge demand that the second part be done so as to unpack the rare knowledge time factor prevented her from sharing in full the last time. With joy, we are welcoming everyone to this part two of this show. But in addition to Dr. Von Shurro, whose keen interest in holistic health has led her to advocate for mental health issues, raise awareness, and destigmatize mental health issues, we equally have Dr. Ayodele Ajayi joining us today. Dr. Ayodele is a consultant psychiatrist who has been working in the NHS for 2 decades. He's a public health newspaper columnist and the founder and executive lead of Mentoring to Medicine, a mentoring organization that empowers school and college students from disadvantaged backgrounds to achieve their lofty dreams of studying medicine. Dr. Ayodele also manages a YouTube channel called Tripartite Care, where he delivers bite-sized information on mental health education that are relevant to both Black and church communities. Please, doctors, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ugo. It's wonderful to see you again this Sunday. And Dr. Ajayi, what an honor to share a platform with you. Thank you for joining us, and we're so honored that you could come and share your expertise with us as well.
Thank you very much, Rico, for having me on the show, and Dr. Shurro, thank you so much as well. I'm looking forward to sharing the platform with you.
Wonderful.
Okay. Just like a quick recap of the last time to see if there's a contrary perspective or like a reaffirming of what we just said. Dr. Ayodele, what does mental health mean to you, and why is mental health literacy a necessity, in the African milieu today?
Yeah, I think that's a question that we must all begin to answer now, whichever part of the world we live in this day and age, post-COVID or towards the end of COVID. That's something very crucial. And the part of that question that strikes me most is the health, because mental health, and we all know that there is no health without mental health. So in order to talk about mental health first, we need to talk about health. So health, as we know, according to the World Health Organization, is a state of well-being. It's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease and infirmities. So what we are saying here is that health is an umbrella term. It's very robust. It covers many topics, and that includes mental health. But mental health by itself is a state of well-being in which one is able to fulfill their potential, one is able to cope with stresses of life, one is able to contribute to community, and one is able to work productively. So there are about 4 things under that umbrella in terms of really coping with stress, but also being able to maximize one's potential. Every one of us has things, dreams in our hearts. We are unique in our own ways, and being able to live out those dreams is part of your mental health. But also to cope with the challenges that come your way. COVID has brought so many challenges our way. And of course, also able to contribute to community. That's part of our mental well-being. It's important for us to feel that we are making things happen in our community. We are being part of. No man is an island, and those are that's what mental health really means to me. And in terms of why it's important because when we are in a mentally healthy place, we are able to fulfill those dreams. But also, more importantly, I think the generational impact of mental health is very important. If a parent is healthy, then you raise children who are likely to be mentally well and socially balanced. And that knock on effect, generational mental health, is something very crucial. And so it's important to see it. And of course, we know that mental well being is associated with longevity. That when we are mentally unwell, it does can have a negative impact on lifespan.
Wow.
Okay, wow. Okay, Dr. Shurro, you want to add something?
Well, I just really, what Dr. Ajayi just really said resonated with me. Last week, we made a recommendation, and I read a book called Why Love Matters. Dr. Ajayi, I don't know if you've come across it. But in there, it's such a powerful book because it shared some of the emerging evidence that's coming out, the links between prenatal and postnatal events, for example, and long term mental health and the risk of developing certain addiction types or certain mental health problems. It absolutely revolutionized my thinking as a professional, but also my thinking as a mother. Because I realized that mental health or the brain and the physiological development that goes on in utero or in the womb of a woman, and what the child or the brain of the fetus or the brain of the child is exposed to in utero actually really tremendously impacts on their mental health. And not just in the immediate when they're born. For example, we know that women, when they suffer from, traumatic births and the child suffers a traumatic head injury, we immediately can see, isn't it, the brain damage that that causes. However, I didn't think so much of the physiological and the things that happen on a neurotransmitter level, to shape the circuits and to shape the schemas even in a child, and how those patterns are laid down even into the subconscious, and then impact on long-term mental health outcomes. So your point about the generational benefit of a good mental health, I think it's one that really our listeners today ought to mark and ought to share with everybody, that here we're not just talking about having a good life and being in good health, but we're talking about having future, we're shaping the future essentially, and we're talking about generations to come that are able to be healthy and productive because their parents and those that came them were healthy and productive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think those are so.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Last time we looked at the concept of depression, Dr. Shurro, let me come back to you. And we looked at the fact that about 300 million people globally are suffering from depression, of which is probably the leading cause of suicide worldwide. Um, but let's shift our focus to social media. Over the last decade, studies have shown that the frequent use of social media by teens, you know, has a clear correlation to their mental health. For example, a study showed that 14 to 17-year-olds, who use social media 7 hours per day, we are more than twice as likely to have been diagnosed with depression. On the other hand, according to a report released in 2021 by the Common Sense Media, young people surveyed say social media is crucial for them in order to get support and advice, feel less alone, and express themselves creatively, as well as stay in touch with friends. Among 43% of these people interviewed, they say that social media makes them feel better when depressed. In your own educated opinion, does social media harm or improve mental health? In other words, how can social media be leveraged to improve mental health? Dr. Shuro.
Sorry, there was a bit of a pause there. Can you repeat the question again?
Okay. Social media research has showed there are two divergent researches on this subject. One research shows that teens who use social media 7 hours per day are more likely to be diagnosed with depression. On the other, another research done by Common Sense Media, um, teens between 14 to 17 years old says that using social media help them feel less alone and even feel better, stay in touch with friends, even when depressed. So, in your own educated opinion, does social media harm or improve mental health? And or to put it in other words, how can social media be leveraged to improve mental health?
Right, I see. I mean, thank you for clarifying that, because sometimes I think the connection was going in and out. But I'm glad to speak first, because then I'll humbly accept correction and modification from Dr. Ajayi, who is obviously more experienced in these matters. But in my own observations, you could almost look at things in two phases: pre-COVID and post-COVID phase, I would say. If I start with pre-COVID, what was going on in the pre-COVID phase, I think, depending on where you are in the world, isn't it? We have known that, yes, people are using social media much more, and to a large extent that has been disrupting, and it was interrupting with actually the ability to make healthy face-to-face realistic relationship, building relationships. We know, I don't know about you, if you came across a lot of pictures, for example, online, which would show a family that visits grandma, and grandmother is there and everybody's on their phone, and grandmother is looking at everybody, and there's absolute no connection there because everybody's on their phone. So what you had there unanimously demonstrated was social media and information technology in general was really disrupting family life and disrupting relationships, simply because I think it was mainly lack of boundaries and lack of communication and lack of boundaries, lack of communication, and lack of understanding its proper place in the social context. So when COVID then hit, what we had there was a disruption to the physical or face-to-face relationships which we were talking about, and actually we had no option but to make use of information technology in order to relate and in order to connect. I know, for example, in my practice, it might be similar for Dr. Jai, but a lot of patients lost their face-to-face or physical contact support groups,
Yeah.
and we had to leverage on social media, information technology, and there's a lot of groups now that have been formed in order to support people who need help. One example being My Mental Health Matters, that we're both part of. But I also know that Dr. Ajayi, you're doing a lot of work with Tripod Care, and using information technology to reach people and to help people understand how they can responsibly use social media. So it will be interesting for us to do the studies again now, or maybe a few years after COVID, to see whether the way we perceive social media and the way we use it has actually changed as a result of COVID, because we now not only see it as an additional tool or a tool of entertainment, but we actually now see it as part of a need. Someone was saying the phone, I don't know if it hasn't happened already, but the phone very soon will be in Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Mm.
as a necessity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about
That sounds funny anyway,
Dr.
Yeah.
Ajayi?
because
I think
it's
it's a very sorry. Go ahead, you go. Right. Okay.
well, it's a patient of observation anyway. When such frustration is being made, the question now becomes, out of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where are you gonna place, how you gonna place the phone? Anyway, okay, continue.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I quite agree with you, Dr. Shurro, in terms of how information technology, social media can be a very blank thing. It's really, and it can also be a two-edged sword. It depends on how we use it. For instance, the reason why we're able to do this across the globe today, this evening, is because you are in your place. I'm in my place, east of west of Kent. You are in where you are in the UK, and Hugo is in Nigeria, and we are transmitting, God knows, to anywhere in the world. So I think it's really about the way we use social media, like any good thing. Uh, it's how we use it to advantage that really matters. So, in terms of statistics, yes, indeed, there is some there's some data that is showing harmful effect of social media, particularly on the mental well-being of young people. There was a study that was done a while back that showed that on the average, teenagers on the average sent 40 text messages after bedtime. Now, it's not the 40 text messages that is important, it's the time after bedtime. And we know that sleep is a very, very important factor, natural healer in terms of physical and mental well being. So that's one. And there are also a number of studies, particularly, there are a number of studies that link excessive social media use, one, to poor body image, particularly with more with girls than more with young girls than young boys, also linked to depression, anxiety, and particularly poor self-confidence. But I want to
Mm.
qualify that this is all excessive use. And the question is, at what point do you draw the line? When does it become
Yeah.
excessive? And I'm quite happy to share this link because there is actually, Google itself recognizes this. And there are so many apps all over the place where you can actually examine your social media use. Google has a link. It's wellbeing.google. That's wellbeing.google/reflect. That's wellbeing.google/reflect. Any of us can go on that on that link, and when we go on that link, we answer a few questions, and it will actually show us whether our social media use is harmful or not. And not only so, it will also help us to put things in place to remedy that. Because
Oh,
because how long is a piece of string? How do you know? It's very difficult to say it's 5 hours, it's 6 hours. But what we know is that if it's beginning to interact, like Dr. Shuro said about interacting with your family interactions, if it's beginning to interact with your outcome at work, some of us need to really take a Sabbath from our phones. We need to take a holiday from our phones and actually say today for 24 hours, I'm not going to use my phone. So I think that's it. That's what I want to
Mhm.
say about that. But it's quite interesting. It can be positive, but if it's not well managed, it can also be very harmful.
harmful. I like the way you say phone Sabbath. After coming across a few documentaries that were done on Netflix, and I can't remember the other news channel, but some of the leaders from Facebook, for example, did a couple of documentaries talking about how they don't use social media themselves, or at least
Mhm.
some of them don't even allow their children to have it.
Definitely.
That that led me on an interesting journey a couple of years ago, where I actually did a couple of social media detox. And what was important and what I was refreshing about that was to go a long period and significant period where you actually just let go of that circuit, almost dopamine circuit that's set when we're using social media, and the reward pathways that make
Mhm.
it such a pleasurable thing to do.
Yeah,
So I managed to break that, but it was also about gaining back control and actually deciding and being intentional about
absolutely.
how I used my social media, saying, okay, how do I want to use Facebook? Am I using this to bring awareness of the things that matter
Mhm.
to me?
Yeah.
Am I bringing? It's about defining the goals, isn't it? We talk about smart goals.
Yeah.
things that are specific, that are measurable, that are time bound, that are achievable, and also that are realistic. And, I had to sort of really define, okay, I've got family all over the globe. We are migrants, and in Lincolnshire, it's just me and my husband, and we've got a few friends. Some of our families are across the country, some of our families are in Canada, some are in South Africa, some are in Australia, some are in Namibia. So, in that sense, we absolutely need social media. And what we found is that information technology and the internet has eaten up the physical space and the physical barriers that were there from people relating to one another. But unless you reflect on it, unless you make intentional goals and definitions and you create boundaries of when am I going to use it, simple things that I've put in place, for example, turning off my notifications so that I'm not getting that red alert, you've got a message, or a sound, you've got a message. I then go to social media at a time that I decide. In the morning, I'll do my status, I'll post my status. In the afternoon, I might check what a few friends are doing. I might say happy birthday to a few people. Meaningful use of it. And I think for me, that has begun to give me back control. And that's what I would also want to encourage our viewers to think about, gaining back control by setting goals rather than just following the ads and all those suggestions that social media gives. We are clear in our minds, what do you want to get out of it, and who do you want to connect with for how long. And if your time is past, if you set an hour, 2 hours, then you discipline yourself to stop when it's like that. Now, I don't know how we're doing with time, Ugo, but if you allow me as well, just to add on a sort of case experience that I experienced during my psychiatry rotation. And I think Dr. Ajayi sort of touched on it, that there's evidence that social media results in poor self-image. So one of the reasons why I became very active on social media and decided to be an advocate of mental health in the digital space, I clocked and I saw, or I consulted a couple of 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds who were self-harming, and some of them who had attempted to take their own lives. Now, for me, I think as a young lady in her 30s, I was very surprised. How does a girl of teenage years know how to do such a thing? How do you get to that point? I was very curious. And therefore, when I took further history and I asked, so how did you get this knowledge and how did you know? She simply said social media, Facebook. And I must say my heart broke because I thought, actually, there's a saying, I don't know, was it by Roosevelt, that says evil flourishes, or it prospers when good men do nothing. And I quickly realized that actually in the name of protecting ourselves, most clinicians, most professional people, we have left the social media and the digital space to devices of darkness and devices of maladaptive and malfunctioning social and psychological patterns. Therefore, if there's no one who is speaking something positive, if there's nobody who is influencing in a positive way, if there's no positive image, and nobody who's creating safe spaces. Of course, we know the companies are trying with much pressure to make social media safe. But I'm talking about people that can relate to other users and show that there's a better way to use social media, and show that it doesn't have to be about competition. It does not have to be about comparisons, body image issues. You can share things that you're passionate about. You can share useful information. You can share things that are happening in the community and use it as a tool.
Yeah.
I realize that I think it's high time that we engage with our generation, the so-called Z generation. It's
Absolutely.
high time that we engage with them so that they can relate to us and so that we can continue to impact and to influence them as this digital revolution continues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, wow, that's amazing point. All about balance, and on the other hand, finding a way that you can say, okay, because we are people, or look at people this way, we are the younger generation, and you are, those who came before us. So if you can say, okay, because we have dominated the social media space, that people are gonna leave it for us to use as we like. You have to come, provide useful information so that, like you say, the forces of light can actually triumph over the forces of darkness. Ill use of social media. And part of the point which I didn't raise was that this issue you talked about comparison. When people see all these filter effects that we
Mm.
have, maybe via Instagram, TikTok, and all that, it makes people look better than they are. And you have to say, okay, oh, my friend have arrived, my sister has done this, and I'm here languishing, not being productive, and all that. So they tend to, go into that depressive mood, and because of that, they see them try to struggle to make it. That phenomenon of instant gratification, trying
Mm.
to match up, and all that.
Mm.
Okay. But let me give you a quick one, Dr. Ajayi.
Mm.
Studies have shown that serious mental illness can shorten one's life by 10 to 15 years. So, how can health policy and systems be designed in a cost-efficient, feasible, and effective ways, to foster mental health? Or, in other words, how can affordable mental health intervention be delivered to people who need it, especially in Africa, but don't know that they need it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very relevant point and a relevant question, not only to Africa, but in fact across the globe. Um, every all the governments of the world are now facing that sort of challenge in terms of how do we deliver effective mental services to our people. And I think it starts in different places for different countries. I think in Africa, I think we need to know where we are to start with. I think data is very, very crucial because if we don't know what the problem is or the magnitude of the problem or the size, shape, and structure of the problem, then we wouldn't be able to deliver, to even shape policies that would then deliver services. So I think that's an area of research in which it's very important. And I'm not saying that there is no research. I'm just saying that there is still a need to do more to really understand mental illness as it pertains to us in Africa. Certainly, from the time I trained in medical school back home in Nigeria to now, I think the terrain has changed a lot. I think mental illnesses, particularly among young people, is something that we weren't aware of then. Maybe it existed, maybe not to this magnitude. So I think there is a need for up to date of data to start with. But also, in addition to that, I think in African countries as well, we also need a lot of more user involvement. I think it's very important. Thankfully, there are a lot of charities, NGOs, and non-government organizations that are springing up now. And I think there's a need for collaboration. And I must say that that collaboration should also include faith communities. I think that faith communities are a large place where we can actually reach people and actually get information in terms of what's happening on the ground, but also to collaborate. I think there are people who will listen to their faith leaders more than they will listen to their GPs, even in this country. That's the reality of life. And I think that it's important for governments to leverage that to actually move forward those policies. But the other thing I would add to that will be in terms of actually helping us to build resilience. I think that for our young people, particularly, there is no doubt it's common. We know it from anecdotal evidence. It's now apparent that young people are affected by mental problems. It looks like there's an increasing evidence in that regard. And what we need to be doing is actually to think about how do we incorporate mental health awareness? How do we incorporate mental health information into the university curriculum? how do we incorporate that into the primary school curriculum? How do we incorporate that into the secondary school curriculum? Because really, the reality is that there is no stressless life. I mean, really, the media paints the picture that there's this utopian person that Hugo was just describing, who is flawless. They come to social media with their photoshopped photos, and they make it look like life is always bright and sunny. When in actual sense, we know that that's not reality. And somebody sees that and they fall for it. So I think that incorporating mental health literacy and mental health education into all spheres of education from the beginning right up to university level, I think would be a very, very crucial bit of that, in terms of what are the little things that we can actually do to cope with the normal stresses of life and to build resilience. Because the reality is that there are little things that we can do to help our mental toughness. It's the mental construct is not one that you're born with and then that's it. You are left with it. You can actually improve your mental well-being. There are things that you can do to improve your mental well-being. And the other thing is just to say that we need time. I think change is something that takes time. For instance, there was a piece of research a while back that shows that from the point that there is some land-breaking research to effective translation into clinical practice takes about 10 years. So those are things to think about, really.
I am very
Okay, Shurro.
I'm very provoked and in a very positive way with all the points that Dr. Ajayi has brought up. And I want to pick on the one about stress. There is no stressless life. I think, all parents, we need almost like a parenting course that trains parents how to talk to children about mental health and how to manage the awareness of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the fact that actually we are not helpless subjects of these things. That is a mentality I'm seeing a lot. But actually, we are agents, and we can have that self agency. We have the ability to control what we think, feel, and if you can control what you think, you can control what you feel, and if you can control how you feel, you can control your behavior. And life is going to be stressful. And I think what was a revelation for me maybe about 8 or 12 months when I did a lecture on stress was stress a lot of times is branded as a pathology, as a problem of stress, but actually stress is a positive thing, and in fact is the first human experience as a baby comes out of the birth canal in the mother. I was very fascinated when I spent a day with the pediatricians in Norfolk, in the sort of east of England, but explaining that the first experience of a child is immense stress. It's actually a stress reaction that is provoked in order to stimulate all the chemicals and all the motions and activity that needs to happen in order for a child to come out of their mother's womb and ultimately to take that first deep breath and to leave. You have to apply pressure or pressure, demand. There has to be that in order for there to be action and development. And so there was if we had it, maybe we'll share it later, Ugo, but there's like a nice curve that demonstrates healthy stress, what they call healthy stress or normal stress, and the point at which it becomes a bit hazardous. We have to manage it. And then the tipping point where it becomes overwhelming and if not addressed can then lead to the pathological stress and ultimately burnout. So I wondered if Dr. Ajayi, you could shed a little bit more light before we get to pathological stress, before we get to the harmful stress. How can we how can we embrace good stress, in practical ways? And how can we leverage that in order to grow and build resilience, as you've said? Can you shed a bit more
Right.
light on that?
So I'd like to pick up from the very nice point you made about the fact that stress can be a good thing. So stress is a blank statement, it's a blank canvas. It's
Yes.
the way we
Mm,
interpret it that and the way we manage it. Because for instance, I mean, stress can help us to increase productivity at some point. If you are stressed about the fact that you are facing an exam, it can actually drive you to study, and then you've got a presentation that could help you 2 3 weeks ahead to gather all the information you need to put together a nice presentation and an impressive one. But of course, it becomes overwhelming when that stress cripples you to the point in which you freeze and you're not even able to prepare, or on the day you are not able to deliver at all because you are so overwhelmed. So
mm,
stress. But in terms of how do you manage stress, I in some of the articles I've written and in some of the workshops I run, I talk about a 6T approach. And I usually like alliterations because
Mm.
it makes people remember things very easily. So T, in terms of managing your trust. So trust is really about the fact that as human beings, neuroscience, psychiatry is now we are now recognizing that apart from the human body, apart from the human mind, that there's also a spiritual aspect of man, and that in fact that attending to that it can be crucial to mental well-being. For some of us, that spiritual aspect, that trust in a higher power is God. For some of us, for me, that's what it is. For some people, it's their families. For some people, it's the environment. But it's something beyond them. And what we do know in terms of managing your trust, so the first thing will be managing trust. So what we do know is that, for instance, for those who have a faith, science does show that neuroscience research, there's a lot of evidence supporting faith and mental well-being, and
mm,
better outcomes even when people are unwell. However, let's also think about what does that mean practically in terms of managing your trust, particularly for our young people. We now know that people who live with a sense of gratitude, the things that are going well in your life, no matter how bleak things are, who keep a journal, who intentionally name the things that are going well, like having a roof over your head, like having your meal, like even having people in your life that you can connect with. Those things that
mm,
we take for granted. You might not have the best, you might not have the latest designer model of your trainers, but yeah, but at least so gratitude we know is associated with a lot of positive life if outcomes in terms of mental well-being. The other thing that we also do know, so that would be thanks in terms of giving thanks. The other thing we do know is really about your tank, filling your tank all the time. Filling your tank is really about where do you get your identity from? Where do you get your identity from? And one of the things that we know, I hear it often, particularly among neuroscientists, that the brain is wired for love. One of the things that we do know is being convinced that you are loved irrevocably. It's not based on performance. And I think that's one of the powerful parenting tips that parents need to give to their children, whether they are failing or passing or excelling. The love that you have for them is not based on what they are doing or what they are not doing. It's just irrevocable. It's love and love. And we know that when people are loved that way, that they perform better in life. So that's in terms of trust. I suppose the other one is about managing our temples. Temple is about your body. There's a very strong link between the mind and the body. We can't really dissociate both. There's a piece of research, I think it's from the Harvard Heart Institute, that actually shows that about 70 to 95% of physical health problems are linked to thinking, to our thought life. So really, managing the physical body, it's about sleep, adequate sleep. And I can't overemphasize that, particularly to young people. It's the myth of the 21st century. And this is probably one of the most profound things I'm going to say today. It's the myth of the 21st century that we can increase productivity by cutting back on sleep time. It's the myth of the 21st century.
Wow. Please recap like 3 times so that our audience we rewire it into their mind because this is crucial and very
So,
important.
so it's the myth of the 21st century that we can increase productivity by cutting back on sleep time. So basically, breaking it down, sleep is so crucial to our physical and mental well-being that if we constantly do not sleep well enough, we are shortchanging ourselves. And it's a myth, it's a fallacy, it's a lie. We're only deceiving ourselves to then say, I'll cut back on sleep time and it will increase my productivity. If you study, and this there's studies and studies that have shown this, that when we sleep, we actually our brain rests and our brain reconnects, our brain rejuvenates itself, and we are now in a a mentally better place to actually deliver. So sleep, in terms of even the things that we eat, exercise is another very, very important thing. Exercise. And in terms of sleep, just say for an average person, usually 8 hours of sleep. We do know that as we get older, our sleep need diminishes. But this is when we're getting into our elderly years. But for younger people, on the average, an adult needs about maybe 6 to 8 hours of sleep to really function well. And the way to know whether you are sleeping well is whether you are feeling tired during the day. If you are needing a caffeine fix during the day, you are finding that when the environment is right, you are finding it difficult to concentrate on your meetings. You feel tired, you feel groggy, you're having mood swings during the day for no apparent reason, then maybe you're not sleeping well enough. So that's for the temple.
Yeah.
That's true, right?
Can I quickly just say, because I'm so happy to hear you say,
just I don't want to. So let me just put in a little point for it to continue. There's this concept of eustress, EUSTRESS, which was coined by Hans Selye, which consists of the Greek that is EU meaning good and stress meaning like literally good stress, which is defined as a positive cognitive response to stress. So that is a healthy kind of stress that gives one fulfillment in line with the person's purpose. A stress that gives someone meaning. Like, there's this great psychologist too. We know him, who wrote the book, The Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about that. What gives people the joy to go through stress is the reward at the end of the work or the end of the suffering, if you have to use it on quote. With such effort and the reward, it gives the person the inner strength to forge, the fortitude to bear, even when it seems the situation looks bleak, and not to fall into despair as we know it. But if I think you have something to buttress in that regard, Dr. Shurro.
Something to say. You're getting very philosophical there. But I think it resonates. What you're saying resonates in general, and I think that's what Dr. Ajayi was trying to explain, isn't it? That in a sense, it's a productive stress that is good for your mental well-being. When you think of mental well-being in the context of the World Health Organization, it's bringing that sense of self-fulfillment. And attaining your goals according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you like Maslow, Dr. Ajayi, but he's pretty good. So that it brings that sense you're having pressure that is pushing you into productivity, and in a way that you've explained, Ugo, it makes you attain your goals and your sense of purpose and identity in a way that productive, and also it brings out your potential, because oftentimes when we're in a place of stagnation, it can be a very depressing place. But oftentimes we don't even realize our potential, what we can do, unless we are put in the deep end, unless we are put in a challenging situation, which calls for us to reach for more in us, and then we realize actually we do have more and we can bring more to the table. So thanks for highlighting that, Ugo. I wanted to just thank Dr. Ajayi for talking about sleep, because as a GP, when patients come to me, I don't know how in Africa it is really managed, because insomnia is a very common problem in our time. And actually, when I looked at the figures, according to a BMJ article, since COVID, it had the prescriptions for insomnia medication had tripled or multiplied since the
Wow.
coronavirus, because people just couldn't sleep. So a lot of conversation that I have with our patients and that I want to encourage our viewers is this concept of sleep hygiene. Um, and that there is a lot of things before you get to medications, because some people will be saying, I want to sleep 6 hours, I want to sleep 8 hours, but I'm struggling. What is it that what is it that I can do? So I wanted to find out, because when I speak to my patients, I always say, okay, have a set time for going to bed, and have a routine or a ritual around bedtime that allows your body to start to calm down. If it's taking a bath, if it's playing music, calming sounds of nature. We know that exercise can stimulate. So if you want to exercise, it's better to exercise earlier during the day. General advice like that. I think the last time I looked at the evidence with the gadgets, they say that there's a type of light that
Blue
comes
light.
through mobile phones,
Blue light.
which, yes, blue light, that's right. And we need to switch off at least an hour. That's our policy with the children. At least an hour before bedtime, we need to switch off all information technology. And also avoiding caffeinated drinks like Coke, coffee, because all of those things, they stimulate us and actually cause us to be awake and make it difficult to have continuous sleep. So obviously that's information from me as a GP, but I wondered, while we have the specialist, whether he's got something else as well to add in terms of sleep hygiene.
Right. I think you are certainly doing a very good job as a GP of that sleep hygiene practice. Tips. I think the only other thing I will add is that people think about just tea and caffeinated drinks as just tea and coffee, but there are also recreational drinks that people take that's got a lot of caffeine in them, energy drinks, and that's also very common among our teenagers. And you can be drinking that all day, and then when it gets to bedtime, you can't sleep because the coffee is still the caffeine is still in your system. So when people think about caffeinated drinks, they think tea, coffee, but there is also the recreational, the energy drinks that one needs to look out for. The other thing would be to you've talked about the bedtime routine. Relaxing music is a very good thing. Also, trying to use bed just for sleep. Bringing gadgets into bed, bringing pets into bed, all of those things actually send messages. It's like a conflicting message to our brain. And of course, the newest tool in terms of non-medication tool in terms of managing sleep insomnia is CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. That's
Mm.
also something. Obviously, it's still very new. It's still in its growing years, but that's also something about changing the way we actually think about sleep. Because really, when we think about it in terms of the COVID-19 situation, there are so many reasons why people may not be sleeping well. For starters, a lot of people are working from home, which will mean that they're probably not doing as much exercise as they previously did by commuting to work. And also, they're probably mentally they could be exhausted, but not maybe physically. And of course, there's also the blurring of work-life balance or work-life boundaries, in which work just goes on forever. And all of those things can actually disrupt our normal rhythms. And when it's like our brain is set to a particular clock. It's like that's why even no matter when on the days you are not even working, you wake up at 6 a.m. anyway, because you wake up at
Yeah.
6 a.m. usually. And that's the way your brain clock is set. So the other thing is to give yourself time. It takes time to change the clock.
That's You have hit the nail, which leads on to my next question, because we know melatonin and all those neurotransmitters work in a circadian rhythm, so in a timed way during the time. Now, they are certain groups of people who are faced with life challenges, and I want you to speak to them as well, Dr. Ajayi. As a mother, I always say, when I've had my babies, for example, and I'm woken up by a toddler every 2 hours, every 3 hours, every 4 hours, all the sleep hygiene goes through the bin, Dr. Ajayi. So that's a one group of people that I want you to speak to and maybe reassure, maybe explain whether the body adjusts to that. And then there's another group of people, which is our colleagues and sometimes ourselves, who do shift work or shift pattern work, where you have to be at your game and you have to save lives, you have to resuscitate people at 12 midnight. You cannot be sleeping or practicing sleep hygiene routines. You need to be awake at work. So can you speak to those people? How can they nurture their sleep, and how can they make up for some of those inconveniences if they can be remediated?
Right. Okay. Those are very important questions. So to start with, in terms of those who are mothers, for instance, who have young babies, and yeah, I think that's a big challenge. But the thing I will say is that I think ask for as much help as possible. And I also want to speak to the daddies out there this evening, or wherever you are hearing me. These daddies, please do. It's a challenging time for women who are having babies and raising children. So it's very important for daddies to also be there doing their own thing, changing the nappies at night, doing the shift work. So I know that as a young dad, that was helpful in terms of being able to do that, being able to support my wife in doing that. And also, I think make use of your larger community as well. I mean, for instance, there are people in our society who are lonely. There are middle-aged people who live alone, elderly people who live alone, who will be too happy to help, because one, it will improve their own mental well-being as well. They feel that there's this young mother that they're helping. So ask for help. In some communities of the world, and I think as a Black person, I want to say that as a Black person, we are not always willing to ask for help. We always want to make it look like we've got it all together. So do ask for help in terms of and get the sleep when you can. I think, and I would also say that it's also very important to put down a rhythm or a schedule or a pattern very quickly for the child. In the very early days, a lot of mothers say that if you're able to set a pattern, particularly if you're breastfeeding, for instance, which is a good thing. I think there's a lot to be said in favor of breastfeeding. Actually setting a pattern or a rhythm for the child can also be a very powerful thing. So I hope those are practical for nursing mothers. And just to help nursing mothers out there, I think you ladies are doing a good job, and I doff my hat for you.
Yeah, amazing. We thank the nursing mothers out there, and especially our health workers who do shift work, because thank God that Dr. Shurro preempted the question. You know, about 40% of people in your line of work as male physicians, and 50% of their female counterparts, complain that they are overworked.
I'm surprised it's that little.
A work-life balance that fosters a happy family life and equally increases the person's productivity without neglecting both aspects. And this resonates with a question that was asked with one of our audience. It says here, what about those who cannot but not have much sleeping time?
Okay.
How about those who cannot but, as in, it's obvious that their work have mandated them that whether I like it or not, you can't have much sleeping time. Example, you always say, okay, let me go too high. You're the president of a country, and sometimes you are in the emergency room. There's a crisis, you need to handle it. So sometimes there's no much sleeping time. Or you're like a medical doctor, you work overshift, they are normally understaffed, the nurses are small in terms of the patients, the ratio is not balanced. So when you have finished the whole day shift, you say, okay, let me catch a 2 hour sleep or whatever, a siesta. And then you have been woken up, doctor, there's an emergency. How do you respond to that? or you're like a mom who works double jobs, like over here in Africa here. You work multiple jobs to keep your family going, to support the man, to support the family. So you kind of that wake up as early as 4 a.m. and go to bed as late as 11 p.m. just to support the family. How do you balance that work-life balance and
Mm.
still maintain a sleep hygiene and foster productivity?
Okay. I'm sure Dr. Shurro has thoughts on that, but just quickly, I'm just going to say a few things. To start with, shift work. I think shift work is now coming into a spotlight. Just to put it out there that the World Health Organization has actually now identified shift work as a probable carcinogen. A carcinogen is possible. Yes, I know. When I heard that, I was alarmed. Basically, and the reason a carcinogen is something that can probably lead to cancer, and sleep distortion has been associated with breast cancer, has been associated with prostate cancer, and associated with bowel cancer. And the reason why they've relabeled sleep disruption is because of the power it has in shift work, the power it has in disrupting sleep, chronic sleep disruption, and now that leads to chronic stress and the impact that can then have. Because basically, when we are chronically stressed, our genes begin to misbehave. That's the bottom line. Our genes, the genetic code in our bodies, begin to misbehave, and when they misbehave, they then start sending wrong messages, and wrong messages perpetually will then lead to several dysfunctions. It's not just cancers, chronic physical illnesses as well, diabetes, obesity, all of those have been linked with sleep disruption. So it's not just cancers, actually, it's not just mental illness. Now, what can we do? I think it's important for us to recognize also about this clock, because personally, what I've found is that if you are chronically deprived of sleep, after a while, your body almost adjusts, but that's a bad adjustment. It's like one is perpetually going into debt and thinking that I'm going to pay it someday. That's exactly what's happening. You then find that, oh, I'm a junkie now. I'm a time junkie. I can live on 4 hours of sleep. Can you? It may the results of that investment you may not repeat in 2 years. You may not repeat in 3 years, but in a slow, subtle way. I think the importance of that is if you are doing shift work, then still try and get quality sleep. And I suppose the other thing is if you can, if shift work is not something you can do without perpetually. So if it's something that you can do without, for instance, that people who permanently work nights, it's good to give yourself a break as well if you can. I know that there are people who are not in a position to be able to do that, but if you can, then that's something to do. The other thing I wanted to talk about is being time budgeting. I think that many times we talk about budgeting our money, but we don't talk about budgeting our time. And usually, just in the interest of alliteration, there are 5 ways to deal with our time or tasks. One of them is to decline. There are things that are in our
No.
schedule that we should be declining. We have no business doing them. We commit ourselves to them and they eat up our time. Somebody said that if you struggle to find the time to do the things that are important to you, you are probably using your time to do some things that are unimportant. So that's one, decline. And the other one is the things that you do. You can there are things that you just need to do. You are the only ones that can do them, and you are the only ones that do them best. Do those ones and prioritize them. Of course, so there's decline, there's do, but there's delegate. Also, to train people in our teams, people in our walls, people who can tasks that we can delegate to people. And of course, there's also the things that we can delay. Everyone's task is an emergency. Everybody thinks you need to do it now, but is it an emergency to you? Is it an emergency to you? And there are some things that they were meant to be declined in the first instance. We agreed to them, but when they then get into our schedule, we probably need to delete them. We need to delete them.
Well,
wow.
That is so deep, and we're in the last minute to getting to an hour, my brother. I feel like we need part 3. We really need part 3. There's so much gold
Okay.
there. There's so much gold to really unpick there. And I've got so many questions
Mm,
and, elaborations for our audience because that is so helpful. And for me, especially, I really identify with what you're saying because I'm a person with broad and diverse interests, and I have got energy and I want to say yes to everything. And, what you're saying really resonates with me, and I'm sure with many of our listeners. I also had a question because you touched on the point about spirituality. That is one of my passions, restoring that in a sense, because the spirituality is important and for our mental health and for physical health as well. That
Okay.
sense of transcendence and
Absolutely.
connection with something that's outside us. I am aware we're running out of time, but perhaps this is something for us to think about because I wondered if you have a comment anyway before we finish. In terms of how we have got a problem with people who are, um, let me say, religious, which is not necessarily spiritual.
Yeah.
Recognizing a point when you can do all this self-help, you can go and talk to your imam or pastor or priest or somewhere in the temple, whatever spirituality that you identify, and getting to the point where you need to access professional medical support. I think we've got a huge problem in the diaspora there in terms of culture, and I think it comes from a culture in Africa, linking to our audience in Africa, Ugo, where we don't necessarily see the doctor as the place to seek mental health support sometimes, even when it's required.
Yeah.
I wondered if Dr. Ajayi had advice about that. How can we break down the barriers, those cultural barriers which stop us from seeking support or looking further, even from what we're talking about, and accessing information from the NHS website, for example, or other official and professional platforms.
Right, good. So I'm quite aware of time, so I'm just going to quickly touch on that. So I speak as a person who is a Black person in diaspora and is also privileged to work as a psychiatrist and also a minister of religion. So I want to say that really one of the challenges is that our people believe that you cannot. It's mutually exclusive. That when you seek help from professionals, it makes you less spiritual or less a person of faith, less of a faith person. There is no such thing. It's okay to mental illness is treated with many prongs. It's a many prong approach, and it's okay to seek a support from professionals, and it doesn't make you of less or less of your of a faith person. And we actually know that those two realms should be working together. There should be collaboration. So the fact that you take medication or seek professional support does not make you less of a person of faith. And I encourage you to actually seek the help. You need professional help. Sometimes, and our ministers also need to recognize where their boundaries lie. It's very important for ministers of religion to actually let people who are under their care know that part of their responsibility towards them is to encourage them to seek support from other people who are more trained in that aspect of their
Yes.
health than you are. I think it's collaboration. It's not competition. It's collaboration. So you
Yeah.
want to say something, Dr. Shurro?
Well, collaboration, but also can you speak to the other corner of the triangle? You've
Yeah,
spoken to the patients, you've spoken
yeah.
to the minister of religion, but how about the medical professionals?
Professionals.
How
Yeah,
can they give culturally sensitive, spiritually sensitive, or enhancing care?
yeah,
We know that the GMC, for example, in personal beliefs and good medical practice,
yeah.
talks about the importance of holistic health and
Absolutely.
being able to identify spiritual needs, cultural needs, social factors. Can you speak to our healthcare professionals? How can they
Yeah,
cater for people's spiritual, cultural, social, that
absolutely.
aspect
Yeah,
of health?
I think that's very important. So it's very important for us as clinicians to be culturally aware and to be sensitive to the spiritual aspect of people's care. And that's
Mm,
it's now it's a responsibility that we have. And a good place to go to is the Royal College of Psychiatrists website. There's a spirituality special interest group. There are about 3,000 psychiatrists in the UK that belong to that group. It's that massive, and there's quite a lot of information about taking, for instance, a what do you call it, a spiritual assessment. Just really being able to know how do you talk to people on that, in that realm. How do you engage with people such that you can deliver holistic care to them and to take care of their spiritual needs. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists is www.rcpsych rcpsych.ac.uk. That's rcpsych.ac.uk. And if you go to some the special interest group, the spiritual.
You can post the comment
exactly
in the chat box.
Right.
Post the link so that listeners can use it
that's
to
that.
engage.
And then the other one that I'll say, which I'm very passionate about, because it's been my joy to support that campaign, is the Every Mind Matters website as well. The Every Mind Matters is www.nhs.uk and /every-mind-matters. So those are the two places I will very quickly refer people to. For if you, as a clinician, you're interested in understanding the spiritual aspect of delivering care and you want to be skilled in that, the Royal College of Psychiatrists website would be a good place to go to just begin to feel and get information. And in terms of well-being for a practitioner, or for yourself or for others, and the members of the public can also visit the Every Mind Matters website, which is got a trove of self-help mental health information.
Do you think we should have mental health support groups at churches? I don't know.
Absolutely. I run one. I run one of those. Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub is actually a mental health wellbeing hub for Black young people who are of the Christian faith. It's very clear that those are the people we target, and it's across the globe. You don't have to be in the UK. We meet online. I absolutely believe that faith communities need to enter this realm, because we have a group of people that we are responsible for, and our responsibility, it goes far beyond their spiritual well-being. It also goes into their physical and mental well-being. And if they come to us, then the honors behoves us to be able to deliver that wholesome care to them, and that involves really having groups to support this.
But what would you say to a religious leader in Abuja or in Lagos right now saying, well, all what you're talking, well, or maybe even in Zimbabwe, let me not just be anyway, in Africa,
limited in Nigeria.
Mental health is a spiritual matter, or this is a demon, or suicidal thoughts are demonic thoughts. I've seen that online from a very prominent faith minister. What would you say to that? How should we be shaping our language in the faith communities and in the religious communities in Africa?
I think it's important for us to get knowledge first. I think because the group of people we are dealing with now, the Z generation, for instance, they are very knowledgeable people. So it's important for us to also go and some of these websites, go there and get knowledgeable about these conditions. In terms of, and that's an issue I get to deal with here every day or a lot of days of the week. Is our mental illness is spiritual problems or not? I will say that let's approach it from a holistic point of view. Let's look at it from a physical, mental, spiritual, and every other social point of view as well. And when we approach it in that way, we are less judgmental, because people who have mental problems are already feeling judged and stigmatized and isolated and alienated. So if the people that they turn to support are not, they don't feel that support is forthcoming, it can be very damaging. So my challenge to ministers of the gospel who are listening today will be, please get educated, and please be non-judgmental, and please encourage your members to engage with other sources of help outside your own support system, including particularly professionals.
That requires humility, isn't
wow, you are really
I I'm
If
tired.
you are every you will ask question until 1 hour 30 minutes. Anyways, just a brief here to our viewers. Like you said, that young man in Kinshasa that is engaging in different acts that are against his mental health. What um, can you give us some bad mental habits that affect mental health and the counterpart, good mental habits that improves mental health, so that our listeners can actually improve their mental health and know what to desist from that harms their mental health?
I think in that regard, the damaging things we've talked about poor sleep. We've talked about the one we haven't mentioned. We've talked about caffeine, but also the one we haven't mentioned is street drugs and alcohol. I think those are very, very damaging things. And sometimes people turn to these things because out of peer pressure, out of feeling like they don't have any other means. They are called maladaptive coping skills. There are things that we turn to try and address a problem, but they not only not address the problem, but they also compound the issue. So they don't help with the problems that we've turned to them for, but they also make the problems worse. So one ends up it's getting for the price of one. So that's why. So street drugs are a no. There's no other way to say it. People say, "Oh, I'm just going to use it once." There are people who use recreational drugs just the once, a party drug, and they don't live to tell the story. It's not all the time, but it does happen. It does happen.
Yes, I think that's thank you for highlighting that. I was just also thinking that moderation is very key as well,
Yeah, yeah,
because even normal day-to-day activities like sex, food, you know, everything can be abused.
use
We've talked about
absolutely.
social
Yeah,
media,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you right. So if you engage enough or if you overindulge
Yeah,
even in something that's meant to be good for you, it can actually become
absolutely.
harmless.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think we can't give an exhaustive list, because actually you might as well think about anything that you can do. I mean, even things like exercise. I speak to
absolutely.
some
Yeah,
patients
yeah,
who have got potential, what we call eating disorders,
yeah,
anorexia, bulimia, and they can exercise for hours, 8 hours a day, and
yeah.
hide food. So even something that was meant to be for nourishing can be a harmful thing for your mental health if you overdo it. So moderation, 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 taking everything in the right way, I think is the way, it's the way to think about it mostly. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of, I mean,
Okay.
so in terms of moderation, yes, for instance, no, being moderate use of alcohol. But I think when it comes to street drugs, cannabis, cocaine, heroin, I think we do know that the challenge is when it's best not to cross that barrier in the
Yes.
first
Yeah.
instance. Um,
Mm,
because
mm.
we do know that these are substances of their dependence, and for
Yeah.
somebody who is already under pressure, emotional pressure,
Mm.
very quickly one could begin to lean on those things for crutches. But for the other thing I want to say is for those who already feel that they're already on those things, please do get help. Help is available. It doesn't mean because you are dependent on substances that you are going to live the rest of your life like that. There is actually help available.
Yes. And of course,
Okay.
you, yeah,
Like
sorry.
over here in Africa, we know that the case of high blood pressure is very rampant. Among maybe both aged people, even some young people, and even though it can be related to stress or to disease or to challenges of life and all that. So um, what advice and tips do you have for those who are suffering from high blood pressure, who are actually hypertensive?
I think I'm going to leave that in the able hands of Dr. Shurro. Who,
So thank you. I'm happy to take that on because this is what I manage day to day. So blood pressure, like any medical condition, we ought to see it from different angles. There are genetic factors that contribute to blood pressure. They're biological factors, things like mental health stress that we're talking about. We know that stimulates the cortisol system, the stress system, and sometimes if it's constantly alerted and activated without enough downtime, that can over time contribute to high blood pressure. But also in addition to biological factors, there's social factors, and there's also dietary factors, there's environmental factors. So it's looking at it in a holistic way. And when we manage, we usually talk about drug treatments and non-drug treatments that we can use. So starting with non-drug treatments, because these are the things that we can actually implement now, all of us, even if we don't have high blood pressure, in order to prevent us from developing high blood pressure. Maintaining a healthy weight. We measure weight according to what we call the BMI, and the normal is usually something between 18 and 25. Above 25, we start to call that overweight. Above 30, we start to call that obesity. Now, maintaining a healthy weight is very good because it's actually shown that for every about 5 kilograms of weight that you can lose, that actually cuts down your blood pressure with about 10 millimeters of mercury. So in Africa, we've got a.
Wow, please, can you repeat that?
Yes. So weight is very
For
important. And
every,
for every about 5 kilograms of weight that you lose, it's about equivalent to, it can result in dropping your blood pressure by about 10 millimeters of mercury. So if I put that into context, normal blood pressure is around 120/80. And we start to talk or diagnose someone with high blood pressure when they get to the areas of 140 clinic blood pressure. So 10 millimeters of mercury is very significant. It could be the difference between a diagnosis and actually having normal blood pressure, because if you're around 145, I might be recommending treatment that includes medication. But if your blood pressure is around 135, then you actually don't have high blood pressure. So if you think about it, just losing weight can contribute a lot to managing blood pressure. Now, the other thing that there is diet, particular salt intake, water intake, sugar intake. Those are the things that we think about. We've been talking about drugs and alcohol. Alcohol in particular, not only does it affect weight, and it can make it difficult to lose weight because it's got a lot of calories, but also because of dehydration and other mechanisms, it can actually in itself cause high blood pressure, and it can actually cause what we call atrial fibrillation or an irregular heart rhythm. So it can cause problems with the heart or blood vessel systems, which can contribute to high blood pressure. So diet, exercise, keeping fit, exercising. We know that when the body is trained to perform cardiovascular workouts, that increases your fitness, that increases also your blood pressure, and it increases your ability to manage stress. We know when we're exercising, it releases all those good neurotransmitters that are good for our mental health, but that help us to feel better, to manage stress, therefore manage blood pressure. So those are, in summary, I might have forgotten one or two things, but we can give leaflets for you to look at things a little bit more. When we come to medication, I always say to my patients, and especially to my family and friends in faith-based communities, there is nothing wrong with taking blood pressure medications. Blood hypertension is one of those things that you can suffer from and actually not know it because you don't necessarily feel ill. But the medications that we have now are actually quite a lot, and they are very good medications with minimal side effects. If you don't agree with one blood pressure medication, your general practitioners are very well trained to switch and to find the ones that work for you. But that is an easy way to manage blood pressure, and we know that blood pressure is important because it also or managing blood pressure is important because it prevents strokes from happening, which we know are common in our people, heart attacks, of other vascular problems like problems in the legs, diabetes, and things like that. So it's very important to take 1, 2, 3, 4 medications for blood pressure, even if you need them, because they are relatively safe. And I can testify, I've got family members who now have lived with the diagnosis for 20, 30 years, and they're still going because they've engaged with that treatment. If they hadn't, we might be talking about something else. So I hope that's useful. My main point, because I've heard even some sort of, let me not even say religious communities, let me say superstitious communities, talking about how strokes is caused by a devil or a demon, it's a little bit far-fetched. I don't know, maybe you
Actually,
maybe
it's one of those misconceptions that we are trying to debunk in this show, mental health, because some of the problem with us here in the African Middle is that we tend to arrogate everything to superstition, to quote unquote God, or any kind of higher power we tend to ascribe something to, that the reason why we are not succeeding, or the reason why we are not progressing, the reason why this person is not mad, or is not doing well, or is having challenges because of some forces somewhere that is actually militating against the person. So this
yes.
partition is one of the things that we need to debunk.
And what I say to that is faith without works is dead. The actual demonstration of faith is in the activities and the habits that Dr. Ajayi has been talking about, which help us to maintain good mental and physical health. When we exercise, when we moderate our salt intake, try not to add too much salt to our cooking, try not to add too much fat to our cooking, use the oven instead of deep frying food. All of those things are acts of faith. You cannot say, I believe God will save me from a stroke, and then eat 12 grams of salt in in your food every day. That is just a contradiction, and I think it does a lot of disservice to spirituality and to God. And it's hypocrisy, if you ask me. So yeah, recommended amounts of salt that we talk about is about 6 grams, and sugar is the same thing, trying to minimize. It's not very much in our culture, but I think we need to start thinking about what is in the food that we're eating, looking at the label. This is why things are labeled, and there's a lot of politics around getting companies to be accountable and to be responsible in what they sell to the public, and making it very clear what is included in those things that they sell to us. And so, us African people and people of all backgrounds and convictions, we should train ourselves to begin to look. If I am buying this packet of ready-made pizza, how much salt is in there? How am I doing with my daily recommended amounts? That's what I would say in response to that. I hope that answers for our viewers, but we will give some more leaflets, because I'm also aware of time, for people to read a little bit further.
Okay. In a special way, I really thank Dr. Von Shurro for gracing this show, and Dr. Ayodele Ajayi for coming out to this show. Like we all know, this show is actually a Sapita show where we um, invite people, which I call everyday heroes, to this platform to share information, stories, challenges, and triumphs in a way that positively impact our world. These people can be entrepreneurs, teachers, they can be doctors, politicians, writers, poets, and all whatnot. So, and it is with this sincere respect for common good that I really appreciate both of you for gracing this show. And to our fans out there, go ahead and subscribe to Sapita's show to receive notifications specification for further elements. And we do crave the indulgence of Dr. Shurro and Dr. Ajayi to answer us next time whenever we call, so that we can equally be mining from your wealth of knowledge to improve our community. So thank you so much for this show, and see you next time.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sister.
Sorry, Ugo, did we get a
So,
link for Dr. Ajayi? Tripod Care, how do people connect with you?
It's
okay, just type it
all
in the
right. Yeah,
comments. Let me post it there
exactly.
comment.
Okay.
I'll do that. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, okay.
Did you get that?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Bye. Bye now.
Okay, doctor. Bye.